Aloha from the East West Center in Hawaii. I'm Susan Kreifels, the manager of the East West Center's media programs. We are pleased to kick off our EWC Seminars live webinars today. Our bi-monthly webinars are designed for multinational journalists and informed audiences to connect, inform, and source media stories. The themes were shaped by survey responses of over 165 international journalists. This forum is focused on a topic that has been plaguing the world for years: disinformation. Misinformation and disinformation are particularly dangerous during this pandemic. Bad information has life and death consequences. We have a prestigious lineup of speakers today to talk about how they are combating this pervasive problem. We also have 150 viewers today in our Zoom room. Thanks to all of you for viewing. East West Center programs cover a huge swath of the world, from Washington, D.C. to Afghanistan. So we really appreciate our viewers, especially those who are up early and staying awake late to watch. One final note. I want to remind journalists to check our website at www.eastwestcenter.org/journalismfellowships. We offer about 10 diverse media programs a year, and we are very proud of our more than 4,000 journalist alumni in the United States, Asia, the Pacific Islands, and elsewhere around the world. So with that, I would like to hand over the program to our moderator, Erin Katie Bartels, who coordinates all of the East West Center's disinformation programs. Thanks to our speakers, thanks again to our viewers, and thanks, Katie. Katie?
Thank you, Susan, for that introduction. I'm going to just jump right into a couple reminders. We've got today's webinar will be on the record. It will be recorded on Zoom as well as made available on YouTube to view and share afterwards. Q&A will happen at a dedicated time at the very end of all the presentations. So keep that in mind. Feel free to ask questions at any point during any of the presentations. Just use the Q&A box, and if applicable, specify which panelists you'd like to answer the question. And as Susan said, it looks like we've got a lot of viewers today, which is exciting. We'll try our best to get through as many questions as we can. So all right, so moving on. I'm really excited to introduce to you our expert speakers today. Just also please note you can find more detailed bios of each of our speakers on our East West Center's Seminars Live website. The first speaker we have in our lineup is Alan Miller, the founder and CEO of the News Literacy Project, who's joining us from Washington, D.C. The next speaker in our lineup is Baybars ÖRSEK, the director of the International Fact-Checking Network at the Poynter Institute. It's the premier global coalition of fact-checking organizations. And our third speaker is Harry SUFEHMI, the founder of a local Indonesian fact-checking organization called MAFINDO. MAFINDO is also part of this International Fact-Checking Network global coalition of fact-checking organizations. Harry's joining us from Indonesia. And our last speaker for today's webinar is ILO with Facebook. She's in charge of strategic partner development across the Asia Pacific region and is based out of Facebook's Singapore office. So without further delay, I'm going to pass it on to Alan to kick us off. So feel free to share your screen.
Okay, thank you, Katie. I'll take a moment to do that. It's good to be with all of you this evening. Having trouble in.
You can,
Okay, there we go. Just having trouble advancing my stack. All right, I welcome the opportunity to discuss one of the most urgent challenges of our time. Writer Philip Ball put it well in the context of the pandemic. Most of us will survive the virus, but it's far from clear that democracies can survive the longer-term destabilization of objective truth. If we want a world where major events can be discussed and debated on the basis of agreed and reliable facts, then we have no choice but to grapple with the epidemiology of misinformation. This challenge has been building since the creation of the internet. The 2016 election in the US was a wake-up call for the health of the country's public life. The coronavirus is a wake-up call for its public health. Misinformation is now a matter of life and death for both. We're now seeing this threat reflected in viral rumors and conspiracy theories about the demonstrations in the US and elsewhere. This has included posts claiming that pallets of bricks have been appearing near protest locations as part of coordinated efforts to incite violence. In fact, they are invariably part of ongoing construction. Similarly, Twitter and Facebook posts with hundreds of thousands of views claim that Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer whose knee was on George Floyd's neck when he died, was pictured wearing a MAGA hat. That is not Chauvin in the photo. Misinformation is already figuring prominently in the 2020 US election. We can expect to see it used to try to suppress voting and in the kind of so-called cheap fake videos that misrepresented US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, or in more sophisticated deep fake videos. Meanwhile, the Russians remain engaged, now joined by the Chinese and Iranians. This is what happens in an internet day, an internet minute, every minute of every day. We share 190 million emails and 19 million text messages. We search Google more than 4 million times. We tweet nearly 200,000 times. And we view 4.7 million YouTube videos. There's no barrier to entry and usually no price to be paid for propagators of misinformation when they are caught or called out. Most of this content meets no standards and offers little or no transparency or accountability. There is enormous incentive to create viral rumors, conspiracy theories, and the like, among them to make money, to create mischief, to gain partisan political advantage, and to divide Americans and undermine trust in democracy. There are also various motivations for spreading misinformation. Some people share for malicious or self-serving reasons or to meet a deep-seated need. Others may do so because they think a group would benefit from seeing a post or because they think by sharing it, they'll actually do some good. The anti-vaccine movement is such an example. I avoid the term fake news because its politicization and weaponization has made it counterproductive. Misinformation is a better umbrella term for false content in its many forms, all of which can confuse and overwhelm us. Misinformation often travels this route. It is spawned in closed groups like 4chan, WhatsApp, or Anonymous. It then spreads to social media through Facebook, Twitter, and bloggers. It is picked up by a prominent politician or celebrity, or even a national leader. And it's then covered by the mainstream media and alternative media. Even when mainstream sources debunk it, this amplifies it and gives it greater credence among some. A classic recent case involved Martin Gugino, the 75-year-old protester who was shoved to the ground by the police in Buffalo and suffered a fractured skull. A fringe blog called Conservative Treehouse first claimed, without any evidence, that Gugino was a provocateur for Antifa, the militant far-left movement. This was picked up by OAN, the far-right opinion channel that has been known to peddle conspiracy theories. President Trump then tweeted about it, and the mainstream media felt compelled to report on it and debunk it. Conspiracy theories are a particularly toxic form of misinformation that are on the rise amid the pandemic, the protests, and the election. They appeal because they provide a simple answer to a complex challenge. They legitimize fears and feelings. They create a sense of belonging, of us versus them. And they identify a target to direct anger towards, often the other, a minority group or a foreign entity. Here are 3 kinds of bad actors who are active in digital media. Trolls deliberately post offensive and provocative content. Sock puppets are false online identities, that hide the source of the information, and bots are automated account users that interface with Twitter. As the ranks of bad actors grows, the number of journalists in the US is rapidly declining due to the collapse of the business model for newspapers in particular, which have taken another bloody blow amid the current economic crisis. Meanwhile, journalists in the US and around the world are increasingly under attack, sometimes literally. Police have attacked, arrested, and fired on journalists covering the protests, like freelancer Linda Tirado, who is blinded now in one eye. Meanwhile, journalist Maria Resser's conviction in the Philippines this week on trumped-up charges is both a blow to press freedom and to democracy there. Increasingly, consumers are relying on their narrow band of sources to confirm their pre-existing beliefs, which is further intensified online by the role of algorithms. The result is that not only has trust in the news media in general dramatically declined in recent decades, but it has splintered along partisan lines. A Pew survey found that CNN is trusted by 70% of self-described liberal Democrats and only 16% of self-described conservative Republicans. Conversely, Fox News is trusted by 75% conservatives and only 12% of liberals. The net effect of these dynamics is that 59% of Americans say it is hard to identify false information on social media. This is mirrored globally. The challenge of what to trust is greatest during a fast-breaking story like the protests, the pandemic, a school shooting, or a natural disaster. Amid heightened public interest and anxiety, while journalists or scientists scramble to confirm facts and provide context, bad actors swoop in to set the narrative with false or misleading content that is designed to maximize its virality. The pandemic is a breaking story on steroids. It's a high-stakes, long-running event. It has stoked fear, anxiety, and anger. There are many unknowns and uncertainty amid the evolving science and the mixed messages from public officials. The lockdown and isolation has driven people more deeply to rely on social media, and there's been a nexus of conspiracy groups and theories, including anti-vaxxers, anti-lockdown activists, political partisans, and extremists. Misinformation about the pandemic has been rampant and dangerous. It starts with the source, which has been allegedly a bioweapon created either by the Chinese or the US military, or created by Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation to grab power and profit, or being spread by the 5G wireless network. There have been any number of bogus claims about preventatives and treatments peddled for profit or partisanship. And we've seen efforts to suggest that the number of infections and deaths is being hyped by the media or overstated, including a campaign to take photos or videos outside of hospitals to suggest that nothing was happening on the inside because nothing was visible from the outside. In fact, there is no vaccine yet or effective therapeutic, and the virus's devastating effect has been well documented. The World Health Organization has declared that the enormous amount of information about the pandemic, including misinformation, is an infodemic. The infodemic and pandemic have many things in common, including the virality with which they spread and the need we have to flatten the curve. One way they differ is that there's no vaccine yet for the pandemic, but there is for the infodemic, and I will get to that in a moment. The stakes here are clear. Facts matter. They are the basis for what we teach in our schools, for our scientific research and findings, and for our effective public policy debates and decisions. If facts are in trouble, so is democracy, and that's why we need to do everything we can to give them a fighting chance. That is the mission of the News Literacy Project, a national nonpartisan educational nonprofit that I founded in 2008, and in the process helped to launch the field of news literacy in the US. I first got the idea for NLP when I was invited to speak to 175 sixth graders at my daughter's middle school about what I did as a journalist and why it mattered. Our mission is to create resources to empower educators to teach students how to be smart, active consumers of news and other information, and engaged and informed participants in civic life. We think this is an essential skill in an information age. Given the urgency of our mission and the moment, we're creating new resources for the general public as well. We are making dramatic progress with a number of our resources, including our Checkology virtual classroom, a weekly newsletter that focuses on the most recent conspiracy theories, hoaxes, and viral rumors called The Sift, and a mobile app called Informable, a game for all ages that tests and builds news literacy skills. Checkology is a cutting-edge online platform with engaging real-world lessons led by a diverse group of journalists from reputable outlets. It includes lessons on how to sort news from opinion, advertising, and propaganda, understanding bias, recognizing misinformation, and the vital role of the First Amendment and a free press in a democracy. Checkology has made NLP the largest provider of news literacy education in the US. More than 24,000 educators in every state have used it with more than 161,000 students. In addition, educators in 116 other countries have registered to use it as well. It's time that we recognize and confront misinformation for the plague that it is, and adopt a new ethos of personal responsibility to combat it. In short, we need a sea change in attitudes and behavior around the consumption and sharing of news and other information, like we've seen in the US with such societal challenges as smoking, drunk driving, and littering. Here's a simple way we can all start. Check your sources before you share, be mindful of what you share, and push back against misinformation whenever and however you encounter it. We're happy to share our resources from NLP with all of you, all of which are available at no cost. In addition, here are individuals who track and analyze misinformation that you can follow. And here are some of the independent fact-checking organizations that you can turn to when you have questions about a piece of information. Of course, you'll hear more about them this evening as well. Finally, dangerous misinformation cannot achieve its virality and infect so many without consumers sharing it, whether wittingly or unwittingly. I encourage all of you to join our cause and become part of an information solution to help us avoid the looming misinformation dystopia. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan, so much for that. I wanted to sort of jump back to that powerful quote you mentioned while we're in the midst of this perfect storm, as you put it, with facts in trouble as well as democracy in trouble. If we want a world where major events can be discussed and debated on the basis of agreed and reliable facts, then we have no choice but to grapple with the epidemiology of misinformation. I thought that was pretty powerful. So I encourage all those listening in who work on the information front lines as journalists or on the education front lines as teachers to check out the Checkology curriculum. It's incredible, as well as sign up for the SIFT newsletter, download the Informable app, practice, play around with it, and continue to, as Alan said, stand up for the facts. Thank you again. So moving right along, again, keep your questions coming in. That was great. I want to move us along to our next speaker, Baybars, with the International Fact-Checking Network, to take us into the global fact-checking world right now.
Thank you, Katie. And that was a great presentation, Alan. Thanks a lot for sharing this. And good evening and good morning to everyone. I'm joining from Florida, so please don't mind the shady background behind me, but hopefully my presentation will lighten up your time during this webinar. So if I can make that, let me try to share my screen, and hopefully you are now able to see my screen. I am Baybars. I'm the director of the International Fact-Check Network at Poynter Institute, based in St. Petersburg, Florida, United States. And I'm just going to be talking a bit about what we have been doing at the Institute and the network to help fact-checking organizations around the world. So let me see. Yep. So the short history of IFCN basically goes back to 2014, but I'm going to start this today with our Code of Principles, which is actually our flagship project to support fact-checking organizations and encourage and empower them to adhere to higher standards in the field of fact-checking. And that goes back to 2016 when we first started and launched our Code of Principles, which was instantly signed up by 35 organizations from 27 different countries. And a couple of months later, Facebook announced that they would rely on our Code of Principles for their third-party fact-checking program in December 2016, right after the presidential elections in the US. And we were able to introduce a new system of independent external assessors reviewing adherence to the code in January 2017. And after that, we were able to also launch a new application portal in 2018 to streamline the process. And just in a year, we were able to reach out to 60 plus organizations from 40 different countries as of January 2019. And as of today, the International Fact-Checking Network hosts 92 organizations from 48 different countries. And one of them, Harry from MAFINDO, is one of them, which I'm very happy to see in the bottom corner of my screen right now. And when we take a look at the broader picture of the international fact-checking community, we see there are 210 fact-checking projects from 68 different countries, according to the recent survey of the Dick Report Step. And as you remember, only 92 of them are part of our network, which is actually a sign or a testament of the growing, but still large enough room for the fact-checking community to grow and meet higher standards to hold the powerful accountable in the society. And in this map, you are also able to see the breakdown of our organizations across the globe. And we are keen to reach out to more and more organizations in the next couple of months. So when it comes to the Code of Principles, I think that's also helpful to just briefly talk about what they actually are. And in a nutshell, we basically ask the organizations to be eligible to be a signatory and then follow our 5 principles, which are the commitment to nonpartisanship and fairness, the commitment to standards and transparency of sources, the commitment to transparency of funding and organization, the commitment to standards and transparency of methodology, and last but not least, the commitment to an open and honest corrections policy. So those 5 principles plus the eligibility criteria is followed by a set of criteria of 31, which we work with our external assessors and our advisory board members to vet incoming applications to our network, either to become a signatory or not, through that intensive certification process. And I guess in the next couple of minutes, I might use my time more efficient to talk about like a couple of last initiatives that we had run in the network. And I think it goes without saying that we have been spending a lot of time and effort to address the pandemic and also the infodemic, as Alan has brilliantly put out to show the challenges that we have been seeing in this field. So IFCN has launched the Coronavirus Facts Alliance early in January 2020 this year. It was the first couple of weeks in January when we were able to hear a couple of stories and news from, particularly from Taiwan, where we have an organization working there, and in Hong Kong, which allowed us to start this initiative to bring fact-checking organizations together to address this incoming falsehoods from the region. And then in the last couple of months, I think we have just passed the 5 months anniversary a couple of days ago. We now have been able to introduce a database of fact checks of more than 6,000 fact checks on COVID-19 falsehoods, and launch our, well, pretty much the first ever global fact-checking chatbot on WhatsApp to do a bit more user-facing approach to tackle this misinformation at a much global scale. And so far, we have been able to generate more than $3 million since the WHO called the misinformation problem as an infodemic to support the fact-check organizations in the form of grants and flash grants, and support grant lines from organizations like Facebook, Google, YouTube, and WhatsApp. And one of the things that I think this infodemic has reminded us is that we need to be more efficient and proactive in addressing the problem of fact-checking at the internet scale. We recently have been putting more thoughts on finding ways to support fact-checking at the internet scale and make sure we are able to address this problem, which is actually an arms race when it comes to tackle this issue with more scalable and sustainable efforts. So we now have been, well, not more than, now more than a couple of years, we have been using claim review and surfacing fact checks on Google search and news, which have appeared more than 11 million times a day in search and news, only limited to Brazil, India, France, UK, and the US when it comes to news product. And that number adds up to 4 billion impressions a year. So we are just trying to see if fact-checking becomes an integral part of our news consumptions, users' news consumptions. And this happens thanks to the work that's provided by ClaimView and MidReview. So if you are a fact-checking organization that publish regular fact checks, it's a free open source tool that you can embed to your CMS and appear on Google search and news results with your fact checks, as long as you qualify as an authoritative news publishing outlet. And that also helps the fact-checking community to build a depository of fact checks. So right now, if you go to Fact Check Explorer, you are now able to see more than 60,000 fact checks published by organizations around the world using ClaimView. And I believe we will be also able to share this slide deck with the participants as well. So feel free to click on the links on the slide deck to see the examples and also the references if you have an interest to know more about this. This also helps us to, well, fact-checking organizations at least to increase efforts on automation by surfacing more authoritative sources on different platforms. And eventually we will also be able to introduce a new service for publishers, which is going to be called FactTrack, which compiles trusted and reliable sources and provides them to other publishers in the form of a database where any other publisher, any other fact checker can match their content with other fact checkers and see if they also use the same reliable and trusted sources. And I will be most likely diving deeper on this, but we also have been a part of the third-party fact-checking program at Facebook. Facebook has been working exclusively with IFC and verified signatories, and that also has been a big part of this fight against misinformation, especially in the last couple of months when Facebook has becoming a more proactive, has been following a more proactive policy to address the health-related misinformation on the platform. And according to the one of the latest polls by Facebook, more than 7,500 fact checks have labeled more than 50 million pieces of content related to COVID-19 using automated matching systems just in April, which is a significant number that has been made possible by the fact-checking organizations. And one of the things that we have been really excited about lately is our fact-checking chatbot on WhatsApp. So right now on WhatsApp, users are now able to access to the chatbot and get a sense of the trends and motives, the trends and the viral, well, not the viral falsehoods, but the fact checks that are being done to address those viral falsehoods from their smartphones. It also helps users to reach out to their local fact checkers in the bot, since we are now able to recognize the user where they come from and connect them with the fact checkers in their countries. And the bot currently operates in English, Spanish, and Hindi, and soon to be launched in Portuguese as well, to help users to get reliable information in countries where WhatsApp is a big medium of communication. So anyone can just download the bot by just clicking poi.nu/ifcnbot. If you have WhatsApp installed on your desktop or on your mobile phones, the link will automatically direct you to our chatbot, and you will be able to use the bot either in English, Spanish, or Hindi. and you see a preview of the bot. In the next couple of weeks, we will be also hoping to share a couple of metrics on the use of our chatbot, which has been showing a significant promise for the future of chatbots for particularly effect-checking organizations and international organizations that wants to connect users with reliable information. So hopefully our audience will be all interested to hear more about IFCN and our projects, particularly our Code of Principles, which is the core of our certification process. So if you have any additional need for information, those links should be helpful. A couple of organizations, a couple of those projects have been also featured in different aspects, probably will be also discussed throughout this webinar as well. So if anyone has any additional need for information, please feel free to consult those sources and also reach out to me and our colleagues as well. So that's going to be my talk for my part. I'm hoping to just keep up the conversation during the Q&A as well. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Baybars. Again, for those listening in who work with global audiences or who are information frontline workers, journalists, reporters, particularly in communities that have a lack of access to reliable information or who are interested in having your newsroom become an IFCN signatory, I do really encourage you to further explore the multilingual resources that are responsive to local needs around the world that Baybars has shared with us today. So thank you again, Baybars. We've got some good questions coming in. So to not dig into more of the question and answer time, I'm going to move it right along to Harry. If you could start working on sharing your screen and get started.
Thank you, Katie. Sorry, let me just do that. Hello everyone. Thank you for coming. I'd like to share some stories from we have done so far in Indonesia. A bit about MAFINDO. We started actually as a grassroots community Facebook forum, to be exact. We didn't really expect it to take off, but there we are. We are now 80,000 members strong and very active every day. Then we get institutionalized on 2016, and chapters in all over Indonesia. Here in Indonesia, we have a culture called gotong royong, where we collaborate with each other, we help each other. Basically, the spirit of volunteerism tends to be pretty high here in Indonesia, and turns out it is very helpful when we began encountering this misinformation and disinformation problem. If, the government works together with us, the police, academics as well, companies, and even the friends in the media, all helped us taking care of this problem. So thankfully, with the help from all parties, we were able to first promote the term hoax to represent the whole spectrum of misinformation and disinformation. This makes it much more easier to raise awareness to the public and also in educating them, because there are quite some types of misinformation and disinformation. It can be quite confusing to the public, so we campaign the term hoax to make it easier for the layman to understand what's going on. Also, during big events, we set up HCC, Hoax Crisis Center, and we've been successful in preventing riots and keeping the peace during local elections. And according to Pressland, our 2019 presidential election was safe from the hoax propaganda. The actors definitely tried, and there have been quite a lot of problems, but from the measurements that they're taking from before and after the election, throughout the percentage of the votes did not change very significantly. So we are very thankful for that. And then when we are preparing for the 2020 election, then came the pandemic. The rise of the COVID-19 hoaxes, most hoaxes in the Indonesia, suddenly we become very popular, and these are the favorite targets and the favorite topics. So we move quickly trying to tackle these new challenges. We try to do 4 things: debunking, detection, debunking, and counter. Debunking is basically dissemination of facts, basically giving the effect of infodemic vaccination by making the society more resistant to hoaxes. An example is covid19.go.id. It's developed by our team. Before this website was up, the information about this pandemic was spread all over government websites. So we consolidate them into a single, easy to navigate website. It's quickly become the most popular website in Indonesia for COVID-19 related information. We also step up these efforts. So because we cannot debunk and we cannot counter a hoax if we don't know that it exists. So we open up our channels to make it easier for people to report any hoaxes that they encounter. And on a debunking effort, we already have the 80,000 plus members of that doing the crowdsourcing debunking every day. We also have hoaxbuster teams in 3 cities, and we also have volunteers on the ground doing offline checks. And after the debunking, we disseminate the counter propaganda through our social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, website, etc. And we also have a Check Fakta Alliance, Fact Check Alliance. It is a collaboration of 24 online media to combat hoaxes. We developed the platform and support it so they can just focus on debunking the hoaxes. And we also very happily work together with our partners, national TV and radio, governments, bureaucracy, community, other our friends at other NGOs, other grassroots communities, academics, and others. And also we are trying to put more priority on our researches to enable better response in collaboration with WHO, CDC, and UNICEF. It was actually the simplified version. The gory details, the actual. This is what we are actually doing. It's we're trying to combat hoaxes by doing it robustly and comprehensively. We don't believe in a silver bullet, so we are trying to combat this problem from multiple directions. That's it from me. Thank you. Back to you, Katie.
Wonderful. Thank you, Harry. It's always just, so important. Thank you for allowing this opportunity for our audiences to better understand misinformation and disinformation challenges in the Indonesian context. For those of you tuning in who are actually from Indonesia, I really encourage you to rely on Harry as a resource. It's very interesting, how you design behavior change fact-checking campaigns, really responsive to the local communities, as well as leverage local government support, your debunking process. So thank you. It's great. So I'm gonna keep this moving along. We've got some good questions coming in. Thanks again, Harry. I'm gonna turn it over to Aya as our last speaker.
Hi, everyone. Let me just share my screen quickly. Okay. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I know we're kind of spanning a lot of time zones, and it was great to hear from Alan, Baybars, and Harry before me. I'm going to talk a bit about third-party fact-checking at Facebook. This is something that Baybars spoke about briefly. A quick intro. So I work with the Facebook News Partnerships team based in Singapore, and I work closely with all our fact-checking partners across Asia Pacific under this third-party fact-checking program. I also do a lot of work with programs and training for journalists on Facebook tools for publishers, and we have kind of a team working with our fact-checking partners globally based in each of the regions. So this is just a quick look of the agenda. I'll move very quickly through this, but I did want to spend some time talking about how newsfeed works, because that really plays a big part in how we think about integrity at Facebook, and then go on to our third-party fact-checking program, and then a bit of a kind of overview of what we've been doing to fight misinformation during coronavirus. So how newsfeed works. Newsfeed is made up of an inventory that's kind of billions of pieces of content that is unique to every single user, depending on who you follow, what you share, who you interact with. It's impossible for every person to see all of these pieces of posts. So there's a certain kind of ranking that needs to take place to ensure that you get the posts that are more important to you. And the way that we do this is we look at a variety of signals. So this could be who posted the story, when was it posted, and then we combine that with predictions. And this is how likely you are to comment, how likely this is to be clickbait, and with these two signals, we put a kind of relevancy score. And based on this score, we rank the content that you see in your newsfeed. And this relevancy score is unique to every single person. And for every single piece of content that is in the inventory, we provide different signals and predictions for every person. So it's a very, I mean, it's constantly kind of iterating process. And this is a very kind of big part in like how we kind of, this newsfeed ranking plays a big part in how we can look at promoting the good content that is most relevant to you, but also really kind of demoting the bad content. So it's much less likely that you will see it on the platform. So integrity at Facebook, we see this in kind of a three-part framework: remove, reduce, and inform. So anything that violates our community standards or various policies that we have in place, which I'll kind of talk about in the next slide, we remove that from the platform. Anything that doesn't violate our community standards but still undermines the authenticity of the platform, we reduce it, and that's where our third-party fact-checking program comes in. And then at the same time, while reducing content and also removing it, we also have kind of product in place to inform users so they can understand why certain content has been reduced, why certain content has been removed. Under the remove bucket, I mentioned anything that violates community standards, we remove. So this is a kind of global set of standards that we have. If you go to facebook.com/community standards, you'll see this kind of huge document that really lists out in detail, broken down in different subjects such as hate speech, harassment, nudity, exploitation. And we put these in place because we really want people to come and have, encourage debate and conversation, but also be able to know that their information's kept safe, their intellectual property is guarded, as well as to encourage respectful conversation. We've also expanded our policy. So any misinformation that is designed to deter or prevent people from voting, voter suppression, we remove from the platform. Any misinformation that incites that could lead to offline harm, we also remove from the platform. And then recently we expanded this, the second one, to include any misinformation that talks about fake cures under coronavirus, any misinformation that talks about, that exaggerates numbers of deaths, numbers of sick people during coronavirus, because both of those could potentially lead to offline harm if, for example, people try those cures, or if people believe these fake numbers, which could lead to panic. So those contents are also removed from the platform. Under the reduce bucket, so this is where our third-party fact-checking works. So we work with 60 fact-checking partners in 50 languages globally who they work independently from Facebook to identify, review, and rate viral misinformation on our platform. All of these fact-checking partners have to be IFCN certified. So that's where we work closely with Baybars and IFCN. And we do this because, you know, this certification ensures a certain level of transparency, a certain level of, you know, they have, in order to become certified, they have to prove that, you know, they're not transparency of funding sources as well as fact-checking methods and a certain level of expertise. So this is where our partner set is. Baybars showed a similar picture. We're slowly in the APAC region, which I cover, Asia Pacific. We're present around 13 countries, and we are continually looking to expand both in Asia Pacific, but also globally. And I think we actually added a few more countries since this map was created. So, and this is just a quick view of how fact-checking works at Facebook. So Harry, who we work with closely in Indonesia, and they will be given access to a internal tool. And that tool has a queue of content that is automatically populated. And with content that Facebook believes could potentially be false news. And the way we identify this content is a mixture of machine learning, AI, and also signals such as disbelief comments from users or users reporting comments. So that's an queued to the system. Our fact checkers also have other kind of methods which they identify false news. So this could be using tools such as CrowdTangle, or they have other tools such or methods where they have, you know, they're able to kind of identify where this false news is able to come. They can also manually queue it into the queue. Then they choose which content they want to prioritize and review, and they spend time kind of debunking this content. They use, you know, traditional journalist fact-checking methods as well, talking to sources, using tools such as reverse image search, and trying to understand and get to the bottom of and also describe why this piece of content is false. They write an explanatory article, which they will then kind of publish on their website and their page, and they will give it a rating. Facebook then acts on that rating by showing it much lower in the newsfeed, which means people are much less likely to see it and also, you know, interact with it. These are the three main ratings they give it: false, partly false, and false headline. So it's quite clear. So false is where the primary claim of the content is factually inaccurate. Partly false is when it's a kind of mixture of accurate and inaccurate content. And false headline is where, you know, it's kind of the headline puts the text out of context, and the headline is false. And then I did mention that, so our fact checkers, they work independently. We don't tell them what to fact check, but we do, I mean, we do give them guidelines on the focus of the program, which is that we really want them to identify the kind of viral misinformation, provably false claims that is really kind of put out there to mislead or harm users. Also financially motivated misinformation. It's not there to kind of look at minor accuracies in reporting or to police speech or interfere in political debates. It's really to kind of focus on the worst of the worst that is out there to mislead or harm. And we're also focused on kind of the type of misinformation that spreads uniquely on social media platforms. So these can be kind of manipulated videos, memes, out of context images. So this is kind of the focus of our program. And this is just a quick view of the impact. So when a fact checker rates a piece of content, I mentioned it gets demoted in the newsfeed, meaning it's much less likely that the fact checker will be able to, that the user will be able to see it. A sharing interstitial, a misinformation treatment will pop up, and users, this is kind of part of the informed bucket. So users will be able to see this piece of content was rated as false, here's why, and then they click through to the explanatory article that our fact checkers write to really understand the reason why this was rated as false. Anyone who's interacted with it in the past, have shared it, they will also get a notification that content that they've interacted with was rated as false. just so they also kind of are informed and understand that they might have unknowingly shared misinformation. And the last screen just shows the kind of related articles, the explanatory article that I mentioned, where they have the option to kind of click through and read about why this piece of misinformation was rated as false. This is a kind of close-up of what our misinformation treatment looks like. I'm not sure if some of you might have seen it. This was actually changed relatively recently based on research we did with users. And we found that now out of all the people that have seen this, 95% don't click through. So we found it to be a very effective way of first kind of stopping people in kind of looking at misinformation, and also in helping them kind of understand why this is misinformation. And you can see there the CY button that would link to the explanatory article, and they also have an option below to see the photo if they do want to continue to kind of interact with it. And then, people often ask us, how we're doing. So this is just an impact of what we're seeing and by reducing it in the news feed. So, when a piece of misinformation first gets shared, we'll see the kind of virality of it really kind of increase exponentially. And by rating the story, we found that we've been able to reduce this virality by up to 80%. So by first making it appear lower in the news feed and also informing users that it's false news, we've been able to kind of reduce this potential to go viral. And we've also expanded to Instagram. Instagram is slightly different in that we don't reduce it on the news feed. We put the misinfo treatment that you can see here in the screens in both the feed, in your, if you did a story, or in your private kind of messaging, and we remove it from the explore section. So this means that people can't find it serendipitously, like looking through the explore section. So that's how we kind of look at reducing the visibility of misinfo on Instagram. And then just a quick kind of overview of what we've done to fight misinfo during COVID. So Baybars had mentioned that we've displayed this kind of warning post to 50 million pieces of content. This is thanks to our fact checkers globally. So when a fact checker rates one piece of content, this could be matched to thousands of pieces of content, because we do see one piece of similar content shared and multiplied across the platform. So one fact check from a fact checker can impact thousands of content that they match, or we can automatically match based on their fact check. Hence the kind of huge number of 50 million. And I did mention this 95%, showing that when people do come across this informed treatment, they don't click through to the actual post. Other stuff we've done, we've set up a COVID-19 information center in some countries. So this is just kind of a resource that people can click through. They can understand the numbers within, it's very localized, so they'll understand the numbers within their country, as well as the kind of top news stories that is most relevant to them. We've launched WhatsApp and Messenger partnerships with governments. And Baybars mentioned that their chat line as well with WhatsApp, which is a great resource if you have any questions about misinfo. I've been using it as well, just to kind of, with all the different languages, it's great to see it's expanding. And then the quick promotions and search resources on Facebook and Instagram. So that's just kind of promoting information, reliable information about COVID. We've done several, our other teams have done several training sessions with local governments and emergency health organizations. And with our fact-checking partners, we work with IFCN to distribute grants to kind of amplify the work that they're doing around COVID. And we work with WhatsApp as well to launch another grant, because there are certain countries where WhatsApp is a primary form of message use, where we are seeing a kind of proliferation of false news being spread. And then we show messages in newsfeed to people who have liked or interacted with harmful misinformation about COVID. We let them know that the message has been removed, and we also kind of connect them to content that has already been debunked by WHO. So that's a very kind of quick run through of of the program. And thank you so much for listening. And I'll stop sharing.
Great. Thank you so much, Aya. Hopefully we're going to be moving into a gallery view so everyone can see all of the speakers on the screen. I think just jumping, kind of ripping off of your presentation, really quick though, those questions that we can't address just for the audience, we will follow up post-webinar. Just keep that in mind if we are not able to address everything. So Aya, we did have one, regarding the recent conviction, regarding Maria Ressa, and a global free press advocate, was convicted this week of cyber libel. And as Alan brought up in his presentation, she said that, quote, Facebook must do more to stop the weaponization of social media. And the general question here is, what has Facebook done specifically to address Maria's long-held concern?
I'm on mute. Okay. Yeah. So in the Philippines, we have 3 fact-checking partners. We actually work with Rappler as part of this fact-checking program, as well as Verifiles and AFP, which is our international partner. And I work closely with Rappler, kind of on the misinformation side. They provide us kind of quarterly reports on the type of misinformation they're seeing and trends that really kind of help inform the rest of the team within Facebook. I represent a kind of very small part of the wider effort of what Facebook is doing to kind of fight misinformation. So my work is more with the fact checkers, but we do have people kind of working in research, content policy, and other kind of areas such as looking at these coordinated inauthentic behavior networks, intel threat. So we've really ramped up the number of people we've hired focusing on this. I think around 35,000 people were hired in the last couple of years, really focusing on kind of local language in market to really understand the local nuances of the market. And it's really with partners like Rappler that are helping us kind of inform the work that we do. And I agree, it's been kind of really terrible to hear. Rappler, I actually used to work with Rappler before joining Facebook. So Maria was actually my old boss, and we have been kind of keeping an open line of conversation with the team there on how we can kind of address this.
Great, great. Thank you so much, Aya. Wanted to jumping right into some initial questions, kind of running through this list. Baybars, but just a series of 2 questions. What tools do fact-checking organizations use to ensure accuracy?
So thank you for the question. I might be a bit more happy if we can hear more about what our participant is asking by accuracy. That would be helpful in terms of, but if that question is more along the lines of how fact-checking organizations make sure their verdicts are accurate, maybe I can, share my 2 cents on that one. So I think the essence of fact-checking is pretty much about making sure the readers have the ability and chance to get a better sense of the context behind the stories and the claims that they see online. So they should be able to also follow the same steps as a fact checker and also come up with a similar verdict that the fact-checking organizations do. So fact-checking organizations actually do not push or expect the readers to just abide by the verdicts, but they encourage the readers to come up with their own verdicts as well. So I guess any reader, user can just hold the fact checkers accountable by making sure the resources, the data, the evidences provided in a fact check are accurate enough, so the reader himself, herself can fact check the fact checkers and make sure they're accurate in their verdict, if that's the question coming from the audience. Hopefully that's my helpful input.
Yeah, thank you. And I think this is another one for Baybars. Could also be one for Alan. We make fact-checking and news consumer habit, like washing our hands. And along those same lines, how do we, as well as combating the sharing of misinformation, disinformation amongst family and friends? So sort of like in our personal lives, how can we make fact-checking and news consumer habit, as well as combating or putting our friends in check when it comes to sharing misinformation, disinformation?
Alan, would you like to start with, I guess, the news literacy and literacy has more thing to do with in terms of like encouraging and empowering people to be more, familiar and equipped with quality information?
Sure, I'm happy to address that. I mean, I think we all need to practice good information hygiene, particularly at a time when misinformation is quite literally a matter of life and death. The first thing is to pause before we hit that like or share or retweet button. Ask ourselves, what are we looking at? Is it news? Is it opinion? Is it raw information? And what are the sources? What's the documentation? Is it presented in a dispassionate way with different points of view to inform, or is it intended to persuade or to incite or to sell or exploit? What's the bias we bring to what we're looking at, our own confirmation bias, and is there bias in what we're viewing? And then, to do a little bit of sort of lateral reading, to Google things, to look for a URL, to learn how to do a reverse image search on images. There are a lot of things that we can do quite readily to make ourselves more discerning. And these are also things that we can share with friends and family, and we can do it diplomatically. Everybody has somebody who's sharing things with them that they probably should not be. And so we can steer them to credible sources, to fact-checking organizations, as good independent outlets. And I think it's important to be upstanders for facts and to push back against that misinformation when we encounter it, and to share those digital skills and a habit of mind that can make everybody around us inoculated against misinformation as well.
Thanks, Alan. And I have another one for Aya. How much, I think you might have answered some of this, but how much responsibility should social media platforms like Facebook, which also owns WhatsApp, shoulder for catalyzing misinformation? What's Facebook doing to address this? So it's another similar question.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's an important question. And, so platforms like Facebook, we don't create misinformation, but we are a platform where misinformation is really kind of amplified. And we do, so we do take this responsibility of this kind of amplification very seriously. And there's different ways that we are addressing misinformation, as I mentioned briefly, on different platforms. So, with Facebook, we've got the three-part approach, but we also have, people looking at clickbait, engagement bait, coordinated and authentic behavior, account like bots that are set up, like really kind of monitoring the different sources and the different way misinformation might be kind of proliferating on the platform. WhatsApp is a little bit harder because it's encrypted. So we actually don't have any visibility of what is being spread. And so we can't really kind of fact check that. So we rely on setting up mechanisms like tip lines or, Harry's been working a lot with WhatsApp and kind of working with the community to kind of relying on them to share content that they think is misinformation. And then he's able to kind of provide the fact check or the right information back to them. And then on Messenger, it's a similar situation where we'll work with local governments to set up kind of messenger bots, tip line bots, where we can rely on information from our users because we can't see the information. Instagram, as I mentioned quickly, was that we have similar kind of detection models. We also really have been improving our technology, working with technology to detect misinformation. So we recently released our kind of community standards report, and you can see there that our ability to take down content at the point of creation, especially on kind of issues, more nuanced content like hate speech, has really improved in the last year. And this is something that we will continue to improve. And, you know, on the program that I work on, the third-party fact-checking program, it's a really valuable part in fighting misinformation because, you know, technology can't do it on its own. We really rely on the expertise of human fact checkers working in the country, understanding the local landscape language, to be able to kind of look at this content and determine how to debunk it. And then we kind of take this content that they fact check and feed that into our machine learning. So it's constantly improving our ability to detect misinformation. And we know this is a very kind of difficult job. We know that our users do still see a lot of misinformation, but it's something that we really kind of rallied a huge team of different expertise together to work on, and also work with external partners like IFCN. With Alan, I believe he worked with my colleagues in the US to really kind of help us do research on the platform and also look at content on the platform.
Great, and there's another question I wanted to just follow up directly because you did mention detecting disinformation, particularly hate speech. There's a specific one. How is Facebook upscaling its capacity to detect this kind of disinformation and hate speech in specifically Sri Lanka in Sinhala language as Sri Lanka approaches their national elections in August? So it's a specific question. I'm not sure if you are able to address that now, but I thought I'd throw that in.
No, it's I've been working a lot, speaking a lot with our counterparts in Sri Lanka recently because of the elections coming up in August. So it's a couple, from my end, it's a couple approaches. We have fact-checking partners there. We now have, we have Fact Crescendo, Sri Lanka, and AFP. They're both have been working, and we kind of work with our teams internally to feed back the trends that we're seeing to them, and they're able to monitor the misinformation that they're seeing come. I also work with CIR, Center for Investigative Reporting, and we kind of look at the programmatic way that we can approach this and kind of inform and educate journalists in market. So those are the two things that I'm doing, and I know that there is a much wider team that will come together during times where we can expect to see misinfo rise, such as ahead of elections, to really kind of look at the trends and the kind of potential hotspots and how to address them.
Wonderful, thank you. And also, I think this could be for anyone. Harry Baybars, if you happen to know, does fact-checking take place in China? And if so, who's conducting this? And is the government involved in this process? So that's a question I received.
Sure, I think I can take that.
Okay.
So that so the pin on that map is particularly for the organization that we have detected doing fact checking based out of Taiwan. So that organization is actually not a part of 5% verified signatures. So that map was the survey that was conducted by Duke Reports Lab. And that particular organization represents China as an organization primarily doing fact checking for Chinese speaking audiences, but based out of Taiwan. So, but they are not a partner of our network. However, we have a Taiwanese fact checking organization that's a part of our network.
Great. Thank you, Baybars. And I don't know, see, Alan or Baybars, what's another good question? What's the data collection process of a chatbot? Does it store user information?
Sure. I think that question is about our chatbot. So when users can, if users are trying our chatbot, I think the menu item for that disclaimer should be 6. So if they click on that menu item, they will be able to see our privacy policy. And our privacy policy just allows us to aggregate data on the number of menu items that our users use. but we don't collect any information other than just those aggregated data points, data signals. So we don't store any username. We do store numbers, and that's also shared in the disclaimer, but we don't collect any information, whether that comes to, you know, the messages that are being shared between users. That's also not possible since the platform's an encrypted platform. We neither Facebook or WhatsApp are able to see those, you know, messages. It's not possible.
Great, thank you. Just trying to get through some of these really great questions. Thank you to the audience again. So some good questions here. Moving along, again, I'm not sure if this is for Alan, Baybars, or Harry. In countries like Pakistan and the Philippines, the burden for fact-checking is largely being shouldered by news organizations, but these efforts can are often countered by either social media posts or the government itself. So can you suggest best practices for news organizations?
So if I may, I probably can just share a couple of insights on that one. We annually publish our State of the Fact Checkers report, and the next report is incidentally gonna be published next Monday. So I encourage everyone to follow our website and social media accounts to get notified when we publish that State of the Fact Checkers report. And when I was able to take an early look at our findings, I was able to see we have now more and more larger media houses launching their fact-checking units. So that's also a trend that we see also in Southeast Asia, and also in different parts of the world as well. I guess except Europe, we see more larger media houses claiming the field of fact-checking. But still, the breakdown is that half of the organizations, it was 54% last year in our network, was still standalone fact-checking organizations, but growingly larger media houses, big media corporations also starting this practice. Since fact-checking is a time-consuming effort, and also in many countries, they have large audiences, those media houses, and they probably want to leverage those audiences to start doing fact-checking and bring them together with more reliable information. So I guess that will be one of the explanations, not only limited to Pakistan, Indonesia, and the Philippines, but growing around the world as well.
Great, great. And Harry, I want to give you an opportunity. You've got a good question that came in for you while we're still kind of on this specific regional fact-checking lens in Southeast Asia. What can civil society in Southeast Asia, including media organizations and journalism schools, do to convince both policy leaders and the public that fact-based news is crucial to democracy? Big question.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it is simple because the democracy is based on informed decision. So without informed decision, there can be no democracy. The democracy will be broken. So we've been speaking with a lot of parties, the governments, civil societies, our friends in many places, basically saying that this is a priority. And thankfully, a lot of them agrees with us and help us in combating hoaxes in many platforms together. So yeah, it is quite a priority, and especially after this pandemic, more people now realize about the danger of hoaxes because it can promote poison as medicine and stuff like that. So even more people are now rallying together with us against this infodemic. Thank you.
Thanks, Harry. Yeah, that was a good question. I have a question for Alan. I want to hear your voice again. Given the recent protests regarding systemic racism and police brutality, is there a need for social justice literacy or quote unquote diversity literacy rather than news literacy? And are schools doing enough to teach young people about press freedom and or civil rights?
So let's take this, I'll take the second part first.
Okay.
I think that the protests have really underscored how vital the First Amendment is in a democracy, not just in terms of speech and press, but also in terms of the right to peacefully assemble and to petition the government to redress grievances. And we've seen all of that in play. And the truth is that the public is not as aware of the First Amendment as it probably should be. The surveys show that only less than 2% can name all 5 freedoms, and more than a third can't name one. And that's before you understand its role in history and how it functions in democracy. So I think this is a great time to really elevate awareness of the critical importance of the First Amendment. And it's something that we make a foundation, a pillar in our education in our virtual classroom. So I think that more could be done. I mean, there's a lot of erosion in the teaching of civics, and obviously the First Amendment is a key part of that. And so this is a good time to underscore its importance here as a cornerstone of democracy. Second part of your question, tell me the other part, the first part actually, again, about teaching about racial injustice.
So is there a need for quote unquote social justice literacy or quote unquote diversity literacy rather than quote unquote news literacy?
Well, that's a little bit outside of our wheelhouse, but I think that this moment has really underscored, I think really made people aware of the extent of systemic racism and the toll that it's taken, and the need to have more diverse voices across all levels of society, including, by the way, in the news media itself. And one of the benefits of this movement is we're hearing more of those voices now, and we're having a national conversation about those issues. And I think this presents a real opportunity for education as well, to focus on this. We did a lesson, we created a resource with a program called Facing History in Ourselves. It's a news literacy resource, but it focuses on Ferguson, on the aftermath of Michael Brown's shooting and the grand jury decision, and uses those events as a prism through which to teach news literacy. And I think that was a really great melding of both the issues of racial injustice, of policing, and using news literacy as a means to have a informed, fact-based conversation, an educational conversation.
Great. Yeah, that's good, Ellen. Thank you. I know Baybars has to hop off soon, and I wanted to make sure I get this question for Baybars. Given that bots have been credited with significantly influencing foreign elections, and I am going to have a question for you regarding this as well. But given that bots have been credited with significantly influencing foreign elections, are there specific mechanisms to address bots?
So yes, and I guess I will be also more able to talk on this more than I can on the coordinated inauthentic behavior and what Facebook has been doing to address that. But I probably just probably need to make sure the chatbot that I had been talking about is a bit different than the bot that we have been traditionally talking about in misinformation. So the chatbot is basically an automated messaging system that helps users to get information instantly either on WhatsApp or Facebook or any other messenger or any other messaging apps. But when it comes to bots, which I guess also require or qualify a further explanation when it comes to talk about their input and their role in misinformation. But in terms of the coordinated inauthentic behavior, many critics, observers have pointed out that they have played a significant role in elections, not only in the US, but around the world as well. So there are great resources that I can suggest anyone who's interested in to take a look. Started from the Stanford Internet Observatory, and a couple of others have a dedicated staff and teams to monitor those coordinated inauthentic behavior. And Facebook, among other tech platforms, also have monthly or regular reports that they walk through the users on how they have been handling this problem on their platforms. But to just wrap this up from my perspective, we probably also need to make sure that bots are also influential to shape the public perception domestically. So that doesn't necessarily mean that they only come from outside interventions. So bots, not the chat bots, but the bots can be also very harmful to shape and mobilize the public discourse in any favor, either before or right after elections as well. So we all need to be very careful about the things, the stuff that we share online, and make sure they are coming from genuine users, not from bots.
So Katie, I was just going to add one other point about bots. There's a recent really striking study by Carnegie Mellon that found that likely 45% of tweets about the pandemic were coming likely from Russian or Chinese propaganda, from bots coming from Russian and Chinese propaganda, which is pretty stunning data point, given how much damage they can do.
Indeed, definitely. Thank you. Yeah, and if you want to follow up with that question, then I have another one kind of riffing off of politics and specifically president related.
So we have had, I can't remember them off the top of my head, but we have had a couple of reports, which Baybar mentioned, where we do coordinate in authentic behavior takedowns. We look at kind of networks of bots. This is especially in the kind of run up to elections or big events. And we've had this in the Philippines, in Pakistan, in Taiwan, like in several countries. This would be the kind of threat intel team that would work with both internally, but also with experts externally to kind of identify these kind of bot networks. So that's one approach that we're doing. And the other one, I mean, from my end, I've been working with Storyful to launch a number of kind of both in-person pre-COVID and online webinars during COVID, training on verification and just how journalists can spot bots on their own. And I mean, to Alan's point, this is, you know, there's a huge number out there. And I think, you know, education for journalists when they're trying to kind of look at or report on this is one small step that we can take.
Great, and there's another one for you, Aya, just riffing along with this similar conversation more or less. Can you please address the controversy within Facebook in the public over Facebook's decision not to tag or take down President Trump's posts about mail-in voting and the protests that appear to violate its community standards?
Sure. I mean, this is, yeah, it's definitely been kind of top of mind for the company as well as outside. I mean, I can just say that, you know, the company's standpoint on this is that, you know, direct political speech is something that we believe as a private company that we shouldn't interfere with. It's already very kind of scrutinable, and we believe that by taking content, direct political speech down, will leave the users much less informed. There are other methods such as kind of providing informing or educating, but taking down political speech is something that we've been quite strong on. This is a conversation that we are having constantly, you know, with our fact checkers and with other partners who believe otherwise. And this is something that we are definitely kind of trying to understand and work towards. But I mean, similar to our, I know this, this idea of democracy and policing political speeches can't be kind of a universal standard, but we have to kind of put that as similar to community standards, which we've made like a global standard. But having said that, with political speech, there is content that we do take down from a politician. So if they are sharing fake news that has been fact-checked by a fact-checker, so if they share a piece of content on their page, for example, that has already been proven false, that will be that will have the same misinfo treatments as well.
Great, thank you. It's another really good question there. I think we are really nearing the end of this really good discussion. We really only have 5 minutes left. So I think I'll throw in just one quick question. So maybe Harry or Alan, how will the continued inability to travel impact investigative reporting and potentially exacerbate disinformation? Or anyone can, those reporters in the room, or Alan or Harry.
Yeah, I think Alan will be best suited to answer the question.
Sure. Well, you know, I'm not a practicing journalist at this time, but I certainly am a avid consumer. I've been impressed by the caliber and range of work that news organizations have managed to continue to produce, given the limitations that they face. I mean, for the most part, they're not working in one place. They are certainly limited in terms of travel. They're limited in terms of being able to see sources face to face. And yet, you know, we continue to see, you know, a lot of very good work, continue to see a lot of investigative work. And we see a lot of journalists who are very courageous, you know, who are out. First, they were out risking their lives and potentially that of their families covering the pandemic, and that's still the case. And now we see it in covering the protests. And sadly, we also see journalists who are literally out covering the story of their life, risking their lives to do it, and then being told that they're being furloughed or let go and seeing their livelihood disappear right at the same time, which really underscores kind of the challenges of the moment. So I suspect that, as the questioner suggests, that these limitations, you know, will restrict the ability to gather some information and maybe gain some access to sources and perhaps some to documents. But I think there's an awful lot that can be done online and through video interviews and through gathering documentation. And hopefully we'll continue to see a lot of, you know, outstanding work despite the challenges that the pandemic poses.
Thank you, and I think that that does. Thank you so much, Alan. I think that does tie us up or tee us up nicely to encourage those on the line right now to also be sure to view our webinar next week. It's the second webinar in our East-West Center Seminars live series titled Reporting, Frontline Reporting from COVID Hotspots. You know, you're hearing from about 7 US and Asian speakers who are mostly journalists on the ground reporting from various parts of the world, really sharing their experiences kind of based on what Alan has been saying, so the immense amount of challenges that they're overcoming. So again, I want to extend a huge thank you to all of our speakers and audience members. Thank you so much for your questions. Just a reminder that you will receive recordings of today's webinar, as well as ideally copies of all the presentations once our speakers allow us to share those. And we encourage you to stay in touch with our speakers. We hope that, audience members, we hope that you can tune in next week for the second webinar of our series. So I think I'm going to close this off and say goodbye and take care, everyone, and be safe.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.